to order the meeting of the Greenbelt Advisory Commission for Thursday, October 3rd, 2019. If we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Fike,
Here.
Commissioner Buttry, Commissioner Ramsberg,
Here.
Commissioner Bloomer,
Here.
Commissioner Gordon,
Here.
Commissioner Grand, Commissioner Stoffer,
Here.
Commissioner Schuler. You have a quorum.
Thanks, Anissa. Moving on to approval of the agenda, and there is one thing that I would like to change from the agenda is item number C1, the fiscal 21 policy agenda. I'd like to table that to the next meeting.
Okay.
Does someone want to make a motion or have any other changes to the agenda? And the reason for tabling that is I haven't had a chance to review it, and I'd like to do that in the executive committee prior to having it on the agenda here.
Sure.
Oh, can I add one item? Is it possible, given that we have several folks here from the public, for Remy to maybe give a fast forward speed version of his presentation?
Perfect. I think that would be a great idea. We'll add that,
If you're up for that.
right, under new business. It's kind of old business, but
He
new
has no
business.
choice.
Be in between old and new business.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Remy.
between old and new business. Any other changes? Does someone want to make a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
I would so move to approve the agenda as amended.
Support?
Second.
Thanks, Stephanie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The agenda is approved. Moving on to approval of the minutes. If we want to take a couple of minutes to review the minutes from the Thursday, September 5th meeting.
We're missing Stephanie Buttry to find all the spelling errors.
I didn't see any.
I didn't see any either, but she's the Hawkeyes.
Right. Does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
John, support?
Seconded.
Thanks, Robert. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Moving on to public commentary. And typically, people are requested to sign up in advance, but we don't typically abide by that. So if members of the public do want to speak, please feel free to come forward to the microphone.
I don't think that's hooked up.
There should be a.
Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Yeah, it sounds like it is. Great.
Very good. Well, I don't know if, I may be misunderstanding what's on the agenda tonight, so I'm gonna be very brief. My name is James Demore. I'm at 2771 Maplewood Avenue in the 3rd Ward of the city, 48104. I just had a chance to look over the review of the Greenbelt, and which you'll be discussing very shortly. Let me just say that I think the Greenbelt program is probably one of the most understated success stories of the past 20 years. And I applaud everyone who has participated in the process, all of you sitting here making a great program. We should do everything that's possible to promote and continue to make this program a success. And clearly at the end of the 30-year knowledge map, thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
James.
Thank you.
And thanks for attending that strategic planning session. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jay Gerhardt. I work for Michigan State University Extension as the local foods coordinator for Washtenaw County. And I'm delivering these comments on behalf of the Washtenaw Food Policy Council and the Farmers and Institutional Purchasing Policy Action Team. Sorry, it's a lot of words. And I apologize for these comments coming so late in the game. It takes a long time for us to approve comments as a board, so we got them approved this week, and now I'm able to deliver them to you. So the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council, for those of you who might not know, is a subcommittee of the County Board of Commissioners, and we aim to increase and preserve access to safe, local, and healthy food for all residents in Washtenaw County. The preservation of farmland in and around the city of Ann Arbor is an important component of that mission, and the Greenbelt program specifically is key towards farmland preservation and thus healthy food access. As Ann Arbor's population grows, new farmers are forced to farm further and further from the populations they serve. This increased distance means that many of the secondary benefits that agriculture provides for consumers, such as agritourism activities like farm dinners, U-Pick, educational tours, and others, can be lost or minimized. The success of Argus Farm Stop and the vibrancy of the Ann Arbor Farmers Market, the increased presence of locally produced food in our grocery store, and the increased number of farm-to-table restaurants in Ann Arbor all demonstrate that Ann Arbor residents seek stronger connections to local ag. The Greenbelt program, in collaboration with other local land trust, county, and township-based PDR programs, have had a direct impact on allowing farmers to feasibly farm on lands around the city and serve the city's residents in these culture-building ways.
You'll still have your full time, don't worry, we're all going.
So the USDA agriculture census data shows that Washtenaw County has lost 65% of our agriculture production since 1935. And statewide, we lose about 2 acres of farmland per hour. And we all know the average age of the farmer is reaching retirement. So as we actively lose both farmland and farmers in this region, we need to support and promote the next generation of local farm producers. Beginning farmers often seek small acreage plots close to urban centers for 2 reasons. One, off-farm income is critical for a beginning farmer's success, and they are most successful when they start small and grow their production over time. The Greenbelt program helps keep the transfer of land around the urban center affordable for the next generation of producers, though it does not always prioritize small acreage plots, which these beginning farmers need. The support for the funding of small acreage plots, and these can be even under 10 acres, and open space, for open space preservation, are some of the most feasible for our beginning farmers to start their businesses. The Greenbelt program promotes, as we all know, open space and natural space and not just farmland. But we would like to emphasize that farms of all kinds are great open space stewards, and we support the increasing of the number of funded projects that involve farmland preservation specifically. There are no management costs to taxpayers when farmers preserve our open spaces. And additionally, local farms that produce food for human consumption provide further benefit by promoting economic development through employment, through taxes, and local purchasing. Farms of all sizes are increasingly becoming conservation stewards as federal, state, and private programs provide the necessary technical and financial support for methods that reduce nutrient runoff, build soil organic matter, and sequester carbon. As such, we support increasing the number of funded agriculture applications as they make sense for our economy and our environment. So to summarize, the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council and its Farmer Policy Action Team supports farmland preservation through the Greenbelt program for the cultural, economic, and environmental benefits local farms provide to the citizens of Ann Arbor. We support the inclusion of small acreage plots and increasing the funding of farmland preservation applications specifically. So thank you to you all for allowing us the opportunity to share our comments. Our public comment is available on the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council website. Thank you for your time.
Great,
Thank you.
thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, thank you. Moving on to old business. We don't have any, so we're going to move on to new business. And Remy, if you could take it away once we get the technical things.
Should be working?
Great.
Thank you.
All right, here's the question. Can we get the mouse working? I have two mice up here, and neither is working. Does anyone know if this is a touch? It's a touch screen. There we go. That's all I needed. Every time. What's it Ooh. I'm sorry to do this on TV.
We're seeing it.
I'm just reminded of an Austin Powers movie.
Oh, no, don't edit it. Now I'm seeing that none of you can see this. I apologize. We may need our handy dandy tech person back.
You want me to run down there?
Sure.
While we're waiting, can we ask questions of Jay, even though I know that was a prepared, agreed-upon statement? How do you feel about that?
I feel good about it, yeah.
We can ask a question
Yeah.
for clarification, even though I know
Sure.
that you don't want to speak beyond what was agreed upon. But you mentioned pretty clearly the acreage priority, but the other issues about local food and certain practices of ag were mentioned, but not really given, like, that's a priority or should be given more priority, and I'm wondering if the board had clear statements on that.
Yeah, we've, in our like exploration of all of this as a council, and in conversations with Remy and otherwise, we've learned that it's really hard to, what is it, like, police
Yeah.
certain farming practices.
Yes.
So, yes, those smaller farmers are often coming at farming with values-based initiatives, and often that is in environmental values-based things.
So the local and the good practices are likely to come along with those small acreages, is what you're thinking?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of beginning farmers, I would say the majority of the ones in our area, have these higher ed degrees. They're often coming at it with, even having graduated from the University of Michigan, with kind of an ecological perspective to farming. And there's also, it's way easier to manage acreage in an environmentally sustainable way when you have 10, 20, even 60 versus hundreds and thousands. So, acres, yes, yeah. So recognizing that's a true, it's a true reality of agriculture. And even though, like, it would be very hard to police that, it is a fact. That said, there are a lot of programs coming down for our cash crop farmers. So these are the ones that can farm on 1,000 acres, that are doing corn, soybeans, wheat in some cases. And we're really excited to see those programs happen, and it will inspire change of practice. So I think we wanted to just take a broad perspective and say that all farmland, because those programs are coming down, should be preserved.
Cool. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
And good to see you again in multiple
Yeah.
different ways, yeah.
One of the things also, I'm on her policy action. One of the things we also in the Food Policy Council are striving for is for the local community to have sovereignty over its food supply chain. And it's easier to do when you have the smaller farms with diverse crops, and are concerned with what happens in their local community. They can provide us with high-quality food, and we can then make sure that they earn a living out of it.
Thank you.
That's really great to hear. I'd love to hear from others, especially from the previous public meetings, whether this really came up small, because I know we talked a lot about the 1,000-acre blocks and the big farm complexes. Were there other voices advocating specifically for small acres?
Not specifically the small acres, the conversation around local food being encouraged through the transfer to new generation of farmers over time was
Right.
definitely a conversation. I don't recall, I don't know if anyone else remember, I don't recall us talking about small farms in particular.
No, I was at all but one of the sessions, and I don't recall the size being, as far as small being mentioned.
It was actually, it does address a concern that some people raised of wanting to encourage local food, and then at the same time, the conversation of not wanting to police local food. And so that would be an
Yes.
example of encouraging without policing that would sort of suit both sides
Yeah.
of that debate.
Yeah.
Right.
Especially if you have a pretty good sense that that is the acreage size that most of our local and/or organic type produce happens on, or is happening on, then.
I would say that if you walked into Argus and looked at the producers there, the ones that are producing in Washtenaw County, even though they might own more than 10 acres, their production is not more than 10 acres. So just to give you kind of a scope and a scale. And they're also, a lot of them are exploring more high-intense agriculture, so more density, more soil building on a smaller amount of acreage. And there's some figures of people getting like $100,000 out of an acre when they do like these high-density plantings, rotations, lots of soil amending, and like, of course, your salad crops and
Yeah.
things like that.
Constant production of high yield.
Exactly.
That's very much the outlier. That's not the norm. Just to clarify, that's not the norm. Yeah.
So, you all with the Washtenaw County Food Policy Council, were you aware of how the scoring for farmland currently takes place within GAC?
Only, I have never seen the score sheet, but I've gotten some information.
Okay. So you know it's weighted favorably toward larger
Yeah,
lots
I
of
did know
land.
that.
Well, then it's just great, so
Yeah.
great to have you come and underscore that point, because we've been, it's just a really vital aspect of the discussion. And
We're doing our score sheets right now.
yeah. Yeah.
And we wanted to give these comments a week ago, but yeah, couldn't.
Yeah, you made it with hours and hours to spare.
You're gonna have to do a song and dance instead.
Yeah, Remy, you're gonna have to dance it out. I went down the hall, I didn't see that guy, he disappeared.
If we can just
He
describe the map.
came in
Nowhere.
a,
Was there somebody, was there an
What you
IT
should be
person
seeing
in
now.
that room?
yeah, I tried knocking on the door, no one answered.
That's CTN, it's not IT.
Oh.
So I don't blame them for not answering. Yeah, I'm not sure this is gonna work, guys.
All we'll be missing, I mean, the reason I wanted to hear it was it's so awesome. And you've got great photographs, but there's, and I don't know if it's even worth it now, but you have 4 or 5 slides in there where you and others conducted the first research of its kind, to my knowledge, just measuring the impacts. And if you wanted to just scroll through those slides and share some of that information, I think that might do the trick.
Sure. So I'll just face this way. Moving slides. So there's, what would be useful is a map of the Greenbelt district, which I have a hard copy of downstairs, but raise your hand if you've seen the Greenbelt district. Okay, not everyone. Well, this might be hard to respond. So in 2003, the city of Ann Arbor passed the open space and parkland preservation millage. Voters approved it overwhelmingly with 67% of the vote. 1/3 of those funds are dedicated toward parkland acquisitions within the city limits, and 2/3 are dedicated to regional land preservation efforts outside of the city limits, but within the extent of what is called the Greenbelt district, which is a line drawn around the city, or an area drawn, where city funds can be used to protect land surrounding the city. To date, 5,716 acres of land have been preserved, and to John's point, that is about the extent of what we understood. We understood how much we had invested in regional land preservation, and we understood the number of acres that have been preserved through our efforts and our partnerships. But we kind of took it to a more granular level and asked ourselves what other impacts, ecosystem services, other mutually beneficial outcomes have been reached through our work. So with that, there are 87,000 acres of land within the Greenbelt district itself, which is a large amount when you compare it to what we've managed to protect, 5,716 acres, which is only 6.6% of the Greenbelt district. So while that does not sound necessarily very impressive or impactful, not all of the 87,000 acres of the Greenbelt district are actually farmland. A lot of that is wetlands or woodlands or other natural areas, development, other non-natural purposes throughout the landscape, industrial. So out of that, only about 25,000 acres of the Greenbelt district is actually active farmland. And through our efforts, we've actually protected 20.5% of the available farmland within the Greenbelt district in the first 15 years of the program. And this is, the life of this millage is 30 years. So halfway through the program, we've managed to protect 20% of the available farmland. In addition to that, we've added 642 acres of publicly accessible nature areas in the region in partnership with our nonprofit land conservancies in the area, which there are 2, and Washtenaw County Parks and Recreation, as well as some of the townships. In addition to the 10 public nature preserves that we've added, those nature preserves contain over 1,200 acres of woods, which contribute toward carbon sequestration. And finally, one of the main focuses of the original millage was source water protection for the city of Ann Arbor. Regional land preservation efforts leaving green infrastructure upstream so that as water hits the Earth's surface, there's infiltration and filtration going into the main stem of the Huron, which is the city's source water. So to date, the Greenbelt has helped protect over 19 miles of river, stream, and waterway frontage within the Greenbelt district, 60% of which is located within the Huron River watershed, the rest of which would be located in the River Raisin watershed and Rouge watershed, all of which drains into Lake Erie, so contributing toward the natural green infrastructure preservation to help with source water protection. So we didn't necessarily know all that data, and there's a lot more to come. Actual carbon sequestration measurements across the region for both farmland and woodlands or wetlands is something that we're interested in pursuing, as well as ecosystem services calculations beyond what we've already scratched the surface of. So I have that all on a very pretty slideshow that I spent a lot of time on. So
That was great, though.
Great,
Thanks.
thanks, Remy. All right, why don't we move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the strategic planning session number 3. And Anika.
I am going to go get a map just for the sake of it.
Great.
Thank you.
We're all looking at the same thing.
So for those who are sitting behind me, my name is Anika Matteo, and this is Fran Alexander. We're with Bridgeport Consulting. We're a small firm based right here in Ann Arbor and do the vast majority of our work in Southeast Michigan. We were brought in to help support the strategic planning process and to facilitate the public engagement around this new strategic plan for the Greenbelt. So just quick recap of the process. We had an initial meeting here with the GAC, and then we had 4 public sessions. And at those sessions, Remy presented the full version of his the first 15 years of the Greenbelt presentation. The participants generated a vision for the future collectively. And we discussed and prioritized potential strategic directions, including the ones from the previous plan and ideas for new strategic directions. And then everyone completed a survey, or nearly everyone completed a survey at the end. So tonight, desired outcomes for our conversation: to build a shared understanding of the findings from the public engagement sessions, and then to come to consensus on revisions to the strategic plan framework, which I think you all have in front of you. And then Fran and I will make those revisions that will come back to you in the future. So we'll start with the public engagement data. Fran and I were just reflecting that overall we had really great conversations, and all of you attended at least one and sometimes 3 of those sessions. So you had first person insight. There was a lot of common thinking, healthy, clarifying conversations, questions about what had happened in the first 15 years. There were folks from inside the city of Ann Arbor as well as outside and into the townships. There were folks who were very familiar with the Greenbelt and its history, and there were folks who really didn't have any familiarity with the Greenbelt. There were farmers, regular residents, and conservancy leaders. So we were really happy with that robust conversation and group that came out to have those conversations. There's one caveat as we look at the data. 2 quantitative tools were employed in addition to the qualitative discussions and the gathering of themes. The first one was a 5-question survey, and that was, how did the Greenbelt do overall on performance to date? What did they think was the most important Greenbelt strategy? What concerns did they have? And what ideas did they have for addressing those concerns? And then a demographic question. The second was a worksheet allocating 10 points across existing priorities, but also the opportunity to write in new priorities. So that's where the caveat comes in. That latter was used primarily as a discussion tool, and it was pretty effective for that. As you remember, folks would rate and then have a discussion with each other. Well, how many points did you give to this? Why did you do that? We also told them you can revise it and we'll collect it, and we did go ahead and include that data here. But we would caution that it's really not a large enough N for in-depth analytics, and the write-in component meant that different topics came up in different sessions, and so not everyone had the chance to even, rate the same items. That said, we did find that these data help confirm the directionality of what we heard in the conversations, and I think you'll see that when you review the data. And I also want to thank you, Sheila, for pointing out that it was helpful to have, in addition to the percent of the actual points that were allocated, how many people just plain allocated any points to a particular item. So you'll see that today. So I will provide a quick overview of that summary, and then welcome your questions of clarification with the thought that we probably will want to move fairly quickly through the data so we can get to the bulk of the conversation this evening. We'll play Twister back here on the map if we have time at the end. Okay, so background. 4 sessions were held in July, August, and 2 in September, right? So a total of 4. We had 43 attendees, and if you came 3 times, Jennifer, we only counted you once as a single attendee, okay? Including 8 members of the Greenbelt Advisory Commission and 3 members of City Council. The desired outcomes, no, I don't need to read all that. So, feedback survey. The question, no, let me give you the demographics. So, of those attendees, 40 of them turned in a feedback survey. 24 of those reported living in the city of Ann Arbor and 16 outside. A total of 9 worked for conservation organizations and 7 identified as farmers or farm owners. When asked to rate the Greenbelt's performance to date on a scale from 1 poor to 4 great, the average score was 3.48. And you can see the distribution there with 19 4s and a 3.8 that someone wrote in, and 15 3s. So overall, extremely positive feedback on the performance to date. When asked what was the most important Greenbelt strategy, so remember this comes at the end of all the conversations and the worksheet and everything else. We just said, just tell us what you think is the most important strategy. Quality parcels got 6 mentions, and I added a plus, because depending on the terminology that you use, there may have been another comment or 2 that you would count under that. So this, some folks said straight up, preserve high-quality parcels. They spoke to the soil, as well as the habitat and floristic quality. But additionally, 3 respondents mentioned farmland complexes, which was sometimes identified as a misunderstood concept in our meetings. In fact, the very last one, somebody got kind of emotional at the end. She said, I don't think people understand what these farmland complexes are. And so she really wanted us to make sure that we highlighted that terminology. And so I pulled out for you a quote. It said, I chose farmland complexes because I support protecting best properties. And so to me, that indicated the concept of farmland complexes and parcel prioritization were closely linked in the minds of some of the participants. Outreach and education had 6 mentions. While very successful, it has very low visibility and is poorly understood by the public and some decision makers. Is it James? As James said, and seen as an unsung success story. And then regional planning was a common theme in all of the sessions except the last one, perhaps because the last one was attended by more quote-unquote regular residents and fewer people with real knowledge of this area of work, whereas the earlier had folks who've been doing this kind of work for a long time and really knew in a very professional and front row way what was needed moving forward. And so regional planning was the 3rd most commonly identified strategic priority. There are a few others there that got a few mentions, and then moving on to concerns. The concern with the most mentions was slow process. This was particularly a concern for farmers who've been involved in the process and a desire to see that be streamlined. Lack of education and awareness came up, which is the flip side of needing more education and outreach. And then there were a number of concerns around that were what I've categorized as Park Advisory Commission concerns because they really couldn't be addressed through this process. But we wanted to make sure to note that these were concerns that were raised throughout our discussions and that there is a desire among the public to have a similar conversation that we've had here around the portion of the millage that goes to in the city purchases. So then we move on to the worksheet that I mentioned with 10-point allocation, the priorities. These are very similar to when I showed them to you at the midpoint. They did not change much. And Sheila, when we added the number of people who had selected these at all, it actually fell really nicely with the percentage. Yeah, so that was a great check, actually. Hey, water quality is really important to folks, right? We heard that over and over again. This concept of farmland complexes, again, that was on the original list, and so many people chose that. And then the conversation also ended up progressing to this idea of a more refined parcel prioritization. Local food and new farmers, and 1,000-acre blocks. We did notice that recreation and access and view sheds kind of fell further down the list of priorities. The second set of data are the write-in responses, and we separated those because not everyone had the chance to write in, right? If you didn't hear it from your table, then you wouldn't have written in that option. And yet, among those write-ins, you had 9.3% of the total points going to parcel level priority and this concept of contiguity and regional planning and partnership. So with that, let me pause and ask you questions of clarification about the data portion of our findings.
Well, I have a question as far as the email comments that we're receiving and how that's going to be, or how we're addressing that.
Thank you. So I've been collecting those comments, which are still coming in, and they are, the vast majority are very positive. There have been only a couple, maybe, that had more critical feedback. And so we'll comb through those, especially with the addition of some that are still coming in, and pull out some of the core themes. This is one of the first that has brought up a new topic that we hadn't already heard, this idea of smaller farms. And I'll ask Remy and Fran to keep me honest if you remember anything else as these have been coming through that was raised in a letter that hasn't sort of been incorporated into these conversations, anything that was at odds with what we've heard elsewhere. I think, so.
More general.
Yeah. Well, a lot of you're doing such a great job, keep up the good work, protect more land. There was one around solar energy.
That's what I was gonna bring up.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if I heard that from someone or we wrote this about solar.
And we had a
panels and how
discussion
that-
about that at one of the sessions
Yeah.
too, just thinking about, when you think about, climate change and the actions that we can take to mitigate that or respond, sometimes they're at odds with each other. And so where might there be a space for the solar panels to sort of have a nice marriage with land preservation, and where are there places that the two may conflict with each other? And that was someone who has a particular academic interest in solar energy.
It also seemed to me a lot of the conversation around new farms and local food is also inherently about smaller acreage. So although people might not have said it outright, I think that was there all along.
I think what the
So-
smaller acreage does is provide us
Sure.
with
Yeah.
the metric
Mhm.
for something that, like you said, we don't want to exclude larger acreage,
Yeah.
but we have a reason for
Yeah.
including the smaller acreage.
And yeah, I think we could address
Right.
that best probably
Yeah.
in the scoring,
In your scoring.
for sure.
I was wondering about you said you were pretty happy with the robustness of the
Yeah.
people who showed up and the overall input, and this kind of relates to the how are we including email comments, how are we including any other people who didn't show up or who didn't come to these things? Because I think you're right, there's a good mix of in and outside of Ann Arbor,
Yeah.
conservation organizations, farmers, but they're all very few numbers.
Yes.
And it seemed to be it was people who are either supportive or not knowledgeable. How do we get some of the information from like the MLive commentary that's not always positive? And is that something worth, I mean, like, if we're gonna include the one or two people who showed up, why not include the comments or thoughts of the one or two people who are commenting on MLive? I don't know, how do we value those differently? Because there's some useful points that they raised that obviously it's miscommunication issues, or what are your thoughts
I
on how to broaden the scope
Yeah.
beyond the people who showed up?
Yeah. I was thinking about one of my mentors says, the future is decided by those who show up, so there is a certain amount of that. And it is quite easy for us to sit back on our couches and make snarky comments online. But one thing we did notice for people who came and didn't feel that they were that knowledgeable, or came kind of upset about what's happening or not happening with land purchases within the city. So not everyone came there feeling like, we love this effort, right? Some people
Right.
came with it.
But we can learn a lot from our critics, too.
Yes,
And I guess I'm
yes.
wondering, how do you include
I
that?
think of the survey that preceded this one.
Okay.
How many months ago was
The
that?
University of Michigan.
Yeah, from the
Sent out-
U
Okay,
of M,
that's true.
the master's
And,
project.
we have a summary of that,
Yeah.
including all the comments and the themes within
Right, that's
that.
true,
Mhm.
okay.
And the concerns in there, ones that we heard, there's concerns about the impact of preserving land and affordability in the center of the city, if you recall that.
Right.
There's a few other, I'd say it served both as an education piece because it had content in it that helped people connect. We found out that a lot of people did not know much about it, but there were, that was, I think, a little better outreach for those that aren't coming to meetings.
And as you mentioned, it included an education component. One of our concerns throughout this process was making sure that people had the education before they were asked to weigh in, because otherwise they do it from a place of ignorance and assumption. And so it was really nice to have people watch the presentation and also ask questions, and then have a discussion, which I think you do lose out on. But that being said, we heard very clearly that there's not enough awareness and understanding of the Greenbelt. And so we already know that that's likely a key priority for you moving forward.
Right.
I'll just say that I think, I don't know exactly how the comments from something like MLive or any other public forum like that would be integrated into the strategic plan report itself, but moving forward, I think we all recognize that it's a useful measure for how we're doing in terms of education and outreach, and to keep our finger on that pulse, but also to push us to do better. I'm hoping that the presentation that that I've put together that brought everyone on the same page for each of these public workshops is transformed into an readily accessible video version that can be posted on our website, and it's the first thing that people have the opportunity to watch a 5-minute summary of what is the Greenbelt, how it got started, and what has it done so far, and where's it headed once we're done with the strategic planning process. So there's that sort of nice, in one area, piece of information to refer folks to, but mostly just using comments online as a measure of understanding moving forward.
Earlier in the process, you also asked how people, get or prefer to get information about the Greenbelt. We asked folks as they came in how they'd heard about the meetings. Next door, next door, next door. A little bit of Facebook, and someone emailed it to me. And so when you produce this video, slideshow, strategic plan, annual report, even pushing some of that out through Nextdoor, I tell you, that's where folks have those conversations, and then they can click and watch the video if they want. So that's, these days, social media is where a lot of folks are sharing this type of information. Any other questions or comments on the data findings?
I did have one question for Remy, and it goes back to one of the specific email questions about the solar panels on the farm. And do you know nationally how land conservancies are addressing that?
I know that it's a very hot topic of discussion right now. So as it stands, the farm bill funding available for conservation easement funding through ASAP ALE does not allow for commercial energy production on a farm. So it needs to be energy production for primarily farm purposes. They can sell some back off the grid, but there's a certain threshold that they need to meet or stay below in terms of production. So our own easement could make accommodations for solar arrays. That is entirely possible, but with the other support for leveraging matching funds, we are beholden mostly to the federal requirements at that level. So I know that there's some attention being spent at that federal level, but where that's going and on what kind of timeline, I have no idea. But it's a topic across all conservancies at this point. Everyone's wondering about, many conservancies I know even locally are getting calls about, am I able to do this on my farm right now as our conservation easement agreement stands? And the answer in all cases that I know of is no so far.
And that's because of the ASAP funding that?
No,
even because
the easement template just doesn't allow for such a thing to happen regardless of ASAP funding. The Heart of the Lakes, which is the Association of Land Conservancies in the state of Michigan, does convene an attorney brain trust of sorts, and every, I think, 5 years they update the Michigan model conservation easement. We do not use that model necessarily here, but a lot of conservancies do. And I'm assuming that conversation around solar array allowances and provisions will be included in the next Michigan model, but for previous ones that I'm familiar with, it was not included in there except for on-farm energy production.
Within the development envelope, they would be allowed to do it, no problem, right? Within the
exclusion.
Within the exclusion.
Which we have no.
But I'm just curious, does anybody do that? Is there any, there's no one.
Typically, exclusions are in the 4 to 5 acre range for a 100-acre farm. So with all the farm infrastructure residing there, so I don't think it's necessarily feasible at the scale that people are looking to sign leases at.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they can do whatever they want in the exclusion, but we're not seeing that happen.
Thanks.
Thanks.
The other comment that was not represented in the public meetings or was never brought up, however, the last public meeting on Monday, there were comments around sort of a similar topic of how can we customize our easement template to include provisions that are either mutually beneficial for the farmer and the city or just beneficial for the city, or any number of creative ideas moving forward of what can we include in these protection agreements. One email comment we did receive was about deer management inside and outside the city, and that wasn't necessarily represented as a comment in any of the public sessions we had, so I just thought I'd note that one as well.
Okay, let's move on to the draft framework. So we'd like to get your feedback on this in a fairly structured way. Some of you probably had a chance to review this. Folks who are here from the public may or may not have, although everyone now, I think, has a copy in front of them. So I'd like to do a brief walkthrough of the whole document before we move into discussion. That being said, if you have a question of clarification and I'm on that point, please feel free to flag me and ask the question while I'm there. After I'm finished, we'd like to have you break up into a couple smaller groups of maybe 3 and 4, and I have a couple questions for you about this, and I'll just give you those prompts so you can start thinking while I'm talking. Overall, the first is overall, how well does this outline reflect the important content you want to see in the strategic plan going forward? And we'll actually ask you for a 1 to 5 rating, where 5 is spot on and 1 is start over. We'll also ask you, what do you like? And where do you have concerns? And then what are your suggestions, additions, edits? Okay? So keep those in mind as I go through this draft. So we imagine the draft starting with a piece on history that would be pulled directly from the wonderful presentation that Remy has given, so that anyone who receives this in the future would have that historical context and the successes in the first 15 years. A brief overview of the strategic planning process and the stakeholder engagement sessions, brief summary of findings, like what you have here, and then including the comments and the University of Michigan study that we referenced. And then moving on to our vision for the future. And the overall vision that we heard was to support a high quality of life with fresh air to breathe, clean water to drink, sustainable productivity of soils, and a diverse local food system for dietary choices and overall health. We envision large swaths of contiguous protected land, support healthy biodiversity in the regional ecosystem that provides wildlife corridors, protects our water resources, supports pollution breakdown and absorption, fortifies our defenses against natural disasters, and strengthens natural sustainability. Second, a flourishing agricultural region that's valued for its rich soil and innovative farming practices, which provides the next generation of farmers with access to affordable land, enables small farms and local food production, protects high-quality nutrient-rich soils, and offers beautiful views along area roadways. We envision that the Greenbelt is well understood and supported throughout the region, which enhances opportunities for people to appreciate and use vibrant natural spaces, highlights the economic and environmental value of preserving soil quality and biodiversity, and results in early renewal of a new Greenbelt millage and millage approvals in surrounding townships. Number 4, a well-supported vision for regional sustainability is actualized, with strong partnerships between the county, townships, land conservancies, community agencies, and the Greenbelt, aligned with regional health and equity goals, integrated with climate goals, and drawing support from foundations and other funders. Communities across the state and the nation look to Ann Arbor, the Ann Arbor area, as a benchmark model for similar initiatives. So that was the vision that came out of the 4 sessions, as well as the time that we spent with you talking about your vision. The proposed strategic priorities: 1, actively participate in authentic regional planning for land preservation. Number 2, build awareness of Greenbelt program impacts and priorities throughout Ann Arbor and the surrounding communities. 3, preserve the highest quality lands with parcel level prioritization. 4, align Greenbelt acquisitions with water, climate, and health equity goals. And this all sounds really wonderful, yet there are 2 core dilemmas. For regional planning, the community is seeking enhanced collaboration and integrated regional planning. However, there is limited to no capacity for convening and guiding this work within the constraints of the Greenbelt millage and within the broader community. Quality data on impact. In order to do some of the assessment that Remy was talking about before, to advance this early work that was done on the impact of the Greenbelt, that would require sophisticated analysis for which there is low to no capacity within the current millage, but it would be highly valuable to communicate the use of investment So critical success factors, if you were to adopt these strategic priorities, would be, number one, alignment of resources, and two, clear articulation of scoring criteria. One of those is more challenging than the other. So, at this time, I would like to ask the GAC if we could just mix up a little bit, because I think it would be useful to have.
Can I just ask a
Yeah.
question before you?
Oh,
jump
yes,
into
questions of
form?
clarification, thank you.
The limited to no capacity up on the regional planning. I
Yeah.
guess I wanted to hear from Remy, is that your, what, like, because there was that thing that regularly convened that I forgot the name of.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I guess to me that one sounded somewhat surprising, and I'm wondering where it's coming from, or maybe I'm not understanding.
Yeah, so Preserve Washtenaw used to convene. I'm not sure when the last meeting was, but I'm thinking it was 5 years ago or more. There was clear feedback that folks wanted all of the regional land conservation programs to work together to either not have duplicative efforts or align efforts closer so that the process can be streamlined. The increased chance for leveraging funding, but also not going for two similar projects in a similar area without talking with one another. We are able to participate. We're able to provide information, but truly to rise to the level of coordinating and leading that effort, that requires a full-time staffer, if not more, to corral all of the conservation programs in this area. So we're not able to do that.
So there's a
under the
community
millage and-
capacity, but not specifically the Greenbelt program to be the leader of that
Yes.
effort.
Right,
That's
yes.
all I guess I wanted to clarify. Like,
Yes.
It could exist, what the capacity that's limiting is that this program can't take charge.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
And that the land conservancies that are around the table are also not equipped, and the
Also.
township,
Yeah.
know,
And
so
we've heard that from
looking
them.
around the table, there's a question of who would have the capacity to serve in this role
Sure.
that folks see as really important to advancing the work.
I would ask Remy and, I'm sorry.
Jay.
what's your name?
Yeah.
Jay, they would be able to answer that more. I have data on that from one or two organizations.
That's what I wondered, like, do we
but
have a
I don't
sense?
have, they might have a broader scan. From the one or two I know, absolutely not.
Right.
So there's the concerns around coordinating just around the conservation aspects, the actual project-by-project acquisitions.
Yeah.
And prioritization and aligning those conservation goals. But then there's the forefront of our field and its cutting edge, which is the land access issue, which involves all the conservancies and their work. But there are so many other partners needed at the table to solve the land affordability, land access for new and beginning farmers issues such as MSU Extension, other nonprofits and NGOs, state agencies. And so it rises far beyond the level of the scope of the Greenbelt millage itself. Yeah, I'll just say that.
Yeah, I would second that, and the only thing I would add is one of those complications is for beginning farmers is access to financing. And so with some of the successful programs that we've seen a lot around the country, do they incorporate that level of financial help, access to like loans from interesting places that allow for like weird payment plans and things like that. So it is a conversation that's happening statewide with tons of NGOs and Extension, and even U of M is involved. It's a slow-moving beast, but yeah.
Yeah, the importance is not lost on us. It's the constraints of how we operate and whether or not we can be involved and to what extent.
So one of the things when I read the regional planning, when I think of regional planning, I think of the county and the county government, and not like the conservancies. I mean, working together, like Preserve Washtenaw. So I'm wondering if, when we talk about the strategic plan, that it's spelled out that it's the land preservation groups doing the regional planning. There used to be a planning department in Washtenaw County that doesn't exist anymore. It's now the Office of Economic Development. And, yeah. So, anyway, it could be confusing to members of the general public who, when they see regional planning, they're thinking township master plans and that type of thinking.
I'll say lastly that while there is no more formal Preserve Washtenaw, one of the original purposes and the intent of Legacy Land Conservancy's Huron RCPP and the Greenbelt RCPP, only 2 Ps, not 3, was to kind of reignite that initiative and that communication. And that has been useful, certainly, but it also has limitations. It does not, an RCPP and its mandates do not expand to the scope of the needs that are at the table for land access or developing conservation priorities that expand beyond a certain geographic scope. And some partners are not always willing to engage with an RCPP. So it's certainly a valuable tool and an extremely valuable source of funding for our work, but it is not a perfect replacement for something like Preserve Washtenaw.
Any other questions of clarification before you break up? Okay, so,
Could I add one thing?
Please.
In terms of the capacity on the millage, what is the the language of the millage currently only allows X% for administrative oversight? What is that percentage?
6%
6%.
over the life of the
And
mill.
if-
over the life of the millage, not year by year.
Okay, so, and we don't want to think about the last couple of years of the millage and what might be left of it. But I would say that when you look back at the survey and what we found in the conversations, the awareness and one of the strategic priorities in the past was education and engagement of the public. The survey and conversations show that actually has been not done well and fully. The amount of effort it takes to use Remy or others to do that kind of communication that we've had in that is a lot and won't get better. So the thought of both guiding outreach and education purely on the Greenbelt, as well as activating, leading, or guiding a regional cross-sector robust planning, that's 6%. That's not possible in that kind. And also do acquisitions.
Don't forget the work.
Yeah, the acquisitions. The other thing is, when we talked with Remy about one of the strategies here that is acquisition as outreach, not just knock on the door, but we knock
Right.
out because of quality parcels. My assumption, Remy's assumption, is that is more labor-intensive work, and again, is actually administrative overhead. Unless a deal comes to pass and it can be rolled into an acquisition cost. It's 3 things in here are hitting on administrative costs that you're tightly constrained on.
Sure.
So I'm just, and maybe I'm jumping ahead here, but something that I'm thinking about to address perhaps some of these dilemmas is like perhaps creating a subcommittee of the Greenbelt or volunteers to the Greenbelt program to work on education and outreach. I think probably us at the table here, or at the, whatever these are, are at capacity, but there are probably members of the public who are enthused about the Greenbelt program and want to, do that. So just something that I'm thinking about, and then also looking
I
at,
was going to say, yes, we are getting to suggestions,
yeah,
and it would be,
sorry.
maybe we want to generate them from the group.
Not just suggestion, but I guess I was going to flip side that too. Any strategic planning process I've done, we often focus on like our limitations, but there are always assets out there,
Yeah.
like what can we leverage?
Yep.
And I think it would be useful to list those out, not as suggestions, but as concretely, like right now, what do we have to tap into? And like we've tapped into the Seas Masters projects or into the public, all of these supporters who were sending in emails.
interns that we
Like,
have.
what assets are we
Right.
not strategically using, including the existing partners who would be not a whole version of that regional planning, but would be an insight into what are people doing regionally and, yeah.
And actually, I think, I kind of skipped over this, but if you look in critical success factors, alignment of resources, so it's 1B, generate financial and in-kind support via private citizens, foundations, university and agency partners, and use of matching funds. We had some of those same early thoughts about, it's certainly not like an impossible hill to climb, but it would be one that would need intentional focus and not, and a kind of deliberative approach in order to keep it. We've kind of seen, Remy's done a beautiful job on all these public sessions, and he's been going out to the townships, and frankly, Fran and I think he's amazing at that work. So if you could get him off some of the other stuff and let him do some of that stuff, you would be gold. But then it really does put a pinch on doing the deals that are the day-to-day work.
Right.
Did you have something else to say, or was that kind of?
Yeah, just tying back to administrative costs, coming from a workplace prior to joining you all here at the Greenbelt that relied heavily on volunteers for the success of the program. It comes with extreme administrative costs. Legacy Land Conservancy is truly a pioneer in terms of volunteer monitoring for their easements, but it requires a full-time staffer to coordinate those volunteers. And my wife also coordinates all volunteer efforts on the public preserves, and it's a lot of work. So while it might alleviate some work, or it might add to the impact of the program and its widespread understanding and outreach and all that, there's still a lot of volunteer management efforts within that 6% cap to consider.
Okay, so let's try 10 minutes in a couple of small groups, but I would like to break the two farmer representatives up so we can have diversity of opinion. So maybe Stephanie, you want to trade with John? And then how about we split at the screen here in the middle, so the 4 of you on the left and the 3 of you on the right. And as a reminder, how well does this content reflect what you believe should be included in the strategic plan? Can you please, as a team, come up with your score, which would be 1 to 5? You can agree on where this fits, and then likes, concerns, and suggestions. And we'll come back together in 10 minutes. I'll set a timer.
Thanks, Jay.
All right, that was rocking. What did you think? I'm so glad we have Bridgeport. And great comments from the public. That really, it was like, felt like a missing piece of the puzzle that suddenly clicked into place in a way. I mean, maybe for both of you, it had been kind of in the background.
It was nice to see some of the community. It really was.
If it's going to take place, it has to come.
We've bored the public right out of here.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
We won't need public comment time because they've all
All right,
gone home.
we outlasted them.
I hope it was helpful to have a small group discussion. Sometimes this formal, everyone facing forward deal makes it challenging to have conversation. So, you stay with your team.
I'm ready to
You
come
can be
over.
Stephanie.
Is that all right?
I realize now I forgot to warn you that we were going to ask for you to have one person from your group report out on what you talked about, but actually, we don't even have to have one, you know, you can all chime in. So, but can we start at the top? How well overall does this content reflect what you believe should be included in the strategic plan, with 1 being start over and 5 being spot on? Did you come up with a number within your group?
Somewhere between 4 and 5 for me.
Yeah.
That was for you, not, okay, individuals are nodding.
Yeah, we'll say 4.5.
4.8.
Anyone else want to offer another?
We didn't really put numbers
Uh-huh.
on ours
Okay.
so much.
Yeah.
Can I be an Eeyore?
Yeah.
There's always got to be an Eeyore. I think the content is like the vision part and the strategies. What I would want to see more of is like a logic model to make sure we're consistent all the way through. Because where I see strategic plans fall apart sometimes is that you've got a vision and then we're going to do this stuff, but you lack that direct connection of how is doing this going to get us there so that our metrics can go right along with that and we don't get caught in that, well, you said you were going to do this, but you're doing more of that. Or you said you were going to do this, but you're reporting on something else. So I guess I just, I think the content is really helpful, but to make sure we don't fall in that gap of.
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
that? So I think in some discussions we've had, we've talked about a strategic plan being a vision for success, and then the core components of that are, the outcomes of the GAC scoring committee and the GAC communications committee and then all of you in closed session in your considerations and deliberations. So what's missing from those 3 major components of how the program functions and is run? So do you view those something's missing, and this shouldn't be strictly philosophical, it should be a step-by-step implementation?
I
Or
think it's a rearrangement of what's here in a way that shows very clearly we're doing this to get here.
I see,
We're doing that
okay.
to get here.
It's a
This is
storytelling more
what's-
than anything.
Yeah, and so it's great for communication.
Yeah,
It's great for keeping you honest, and it's great for setting up metrics that actually match what you're doing and where you're going,
okay.
because you won't get caught in that, well, we said we were gonna do big swaths for this reason, but now we're prioritizing small acreage, and we can't justify why we're doing
Got it.
that.
So not the metrics themselves, but helping to keep you honest in the creation of those metrics.
Yeah, and
It's the
a
model.
It is a storyboard, it's a logic model
Yeah.
that puts it all together in a way that's good for communication, for helping us move forward.
Great.
So it's not the content per se, it's
Yeah.
organizing that content into
Great,
that.
that's great.
Yeah.
Sounds like a 5-minute video.
Yeah, and it could be that, yeah, exactly.
Well, and that kind of leads into one of the concerns that was expressed in our session about the renewing the millage early. I liked that a lot because I think, and the reason being is that we're going to run out of money before 15 years are up, so then this vision won't be happening. But then there was concern from John about us being an advocate, our group being an advocate for a millage. So,
Yeah, and a
but
strategic
I
model
think doing the logic model,
Yeah.
I mean, it makes, if we don't have the money,
Right,
this isn't going to happen.
but it also helps you with, this is our long-term goal, like, this is our vision.
Right.
This is our intermediate measure of success, and we're there already at 15 years, and we can show that. And this is our, so you kind of break it down rather than vision what we're doing into a more chronological almost, but also
Right.
logic model.
Yeah.
I can capture in my head, so not everyone.
Exactly, and I figure you're thinking.
concern.
Yeah.
It was John's concern about putting in the strategic plan about renewing the millage early. And my concern is that if we don't have the money, the Greenbelt won't be able to preserve land and meet the vision.
Which I certainly share. Obviously, I'm in favor of the Greenbelt village. It is as much about optics and just the
Right,
delicate
exactly.
balancing act of being kind of impartial, implementing of a program versus stuff that we all probably do on the advocacy side.
Yeah, I
So
guess
it's not
just,
to knock it down, it's just a concern.
just historically, I know like when the Parks and Renewal millage came up, not this, I think last time, but the time before, the person who ran the kind of, campaign was actually a Parks Advisory Commissioner. I think there is precedent for, people who.
Commission members.
Yeah, commission members. I think I remember going on, like a local radio show once as a Parks Commissioner, talking about the millage. I think, so I think there is precedent
Oh, yeah,
out there
yeah, yeah, of course.
for commissioners having done this and not seeing it as counter, but really just supportive of the core mission of what you do.
No, of course, though, I think that also supports my point. It puts you into that space, and it's just a different kind of space. The other, and to connect to it, I had forgotten about this, the other aspect of that was in one of the public meetings, there was a really interesting conversation about possibilities beyond conservation. Things around, right, and renewable energy, around climate adaptation and things like that, and whether or not this as a visionary model for land conservation might in some near-term future be supplanted or be in potential collaboration with some other model, understanding of how we organize our human society. I mean, we just don't know what the future holds. So, I mean, I'm all for keeping it in there. I just wanted to flag it as a concern, something for us to articulate really carefully.
And
I'm sorry, Mika.
you were probably going to say the same thing, just about how we speak to it, that we can kind of pull back from the specificity of a millage or a Greenbelt millage to talk about
What's the outcome you're seeing?
continued
The outcome, right,
support
in terms of
for.
Capacity continues.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think part of what you're saying is maybe it's not a Greenbelt millage, maybe it's a blah-blah-blah millage that includes Greenbelt-like work as part of a larger vision, right? Because there was some conversation about how does this all roll together, like the solar panels and the climate stuff and the Greenbelt, maybe there is a Vision 2.0 that's just comes at it at another level.
It would have to articulate something related, larger vision, resources to do it, community, political will to deliver on those kinds of things. You frame it in that way, and it could take a lot of different shapes.
Yeah. Don't say what shape.
I would like to see us be a little bit more cognizant of our actual restrictions. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff that we could have in here, but the millage, as it was written, was very specific. And I think we just need to maybe see if there's things here that are outside of the scope, and do we need to talk about that in terms of renewing it, and how do we move forward on that?
Were there
Because-
specific concerns in this strategic plan where you felt like, oh, this would be nice to do, but this is outside of what we can do?
Well, I think the regional planning conversation sort of spoke to that already. And again, I would love to see that happen. That would be awesome. But again, just because the will is there doesn't mean the funding or the person power is. So I don't know if there's an answer yet.
But do you see things that are outside of, not what we're capable of doing, but what we should be doing according to the millage?
I sort of do generally, like in this, you've just elucidated it so beautifully, because it's more just of a vague sense, not, and again, I'm
Exactly.
just being open here, of unease. And it comes up when we talk about, for example, trying to prioritize areas of good farm soil or of biodiversity, because it's a volunteer landowner participation
Exactly.
program.
Exactly.
And so there's
Yeah.
interesting language in here that rubs right up against it, where this idea of,
That's the one that got me.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
good, you too.
yes, that protects the high nutrient soils, because the ordinance says nothing about that, and we know our own administrative structure. I mean, we can find those, I assume, with technology, and we can broadly
We can have
speak
the
in that
potential for,
space.
the
Right.
potential for
So,
high quality soil.
Maybe we can speak to one of the potential ways of identifying those. We talked about others, and this is beyond my area of expertise, who categorize lands as sort of low and medium and high, and going to that parcel level priority that you could have, borrow from others that assessment, and then that could go into your scoring process, but not be your only scoring criteria. So it would be something that would be weighted the best quality soils, not replace all other priorities, but
It's
you
not the
can
high-
speak
We
more.
have high-quality soils, and that is in the ordinance about the potential for, so, and that's the one that you use the ag, right, the existing soil type, right, that's most suitable to agriculture.
Yeah, prime ag soils or
So-
local importance or.
I think we're saying that's different than protect high-quality nutrient-rich soils, sort of in terms of practices.
Right.
We can't control that. So this is where, to me, the logic model comes back, to make sure we're not putting a goal out there
Oh,
that
because you don't
we're
know
not
what the
actually
farmer
doing
will do
anything.
with the soils.
Are
or
you
can't
you're
Yeah.
reading protect as in
Protect.
protect versus preserve?
preserve.
So the,
Well-
No,
protect with the conservation easement versus protect the long-term viability of the soil nutrients,
the long-term viability of it, yeah, maybe it's probably a wording thing.
which are
Yeah.
totally different
Yes.
outcomes. There's the baseline, it's not gonna become concrete
Right,
versus the stewardship of the
it won't
soils.
erode
I
away.
think what we were talking about was the conservation and non-concrete option
Right,
versus the actual stewardship of soils and
Right.
soil
Exactly.
well-being.
Well, and I think that fits into something that we spoke of in our group about, that was missing, that
Yeah,
I really picked up from your presentation, Remy, which is about the Greenbelt being there for the long-term
Yeah.
protection of food resources, and I don't really see that in here, and to me, that really struck me at my core about what what I really value about this program, and I think it also gets to, from a different perspective of, Ann Arbor taxpayers supporting this millage, another thing that's kind of in it for them, that as we, that in an urban area, protecting land in, its rural neighbors, and in part selfishly, right? Because there are these long-term resources in terms of food production that can change over time.
Mhm.
But in protecting that land, it's there as a resource
yeah,
for the, for the whole region.
right.
And, and I,
growing the local food economy.
yeah,
through-
but, yeah.
But more basing than
But,
that,
but
the
more,
land.
more for the long term, not even that's now, but, for me, it's like 50, 100 years from now.
Preserving that resource.
So
if-
it's available.
right.
So that it's available, so that
Yeah.
if the city grows, not that we're growing, huge populations now, but say it did jump, say some of these, projections happen. So say our city, grows by 50,000 residents 50 years from now. What does that look like in terms of having food, resources
Sure.
on the outside?
That's a great
I mean,
point.
if you look at our economic growth projections, if you look at the number of jobs that are, the jobs are growing in urban areas. That's true nationally, that's not just true in our region, right? So what does that mean to protect the land indefinitely?
That's really nice. It sort of speaks to both, it feels more achievable,
Yeah,
right?
versus
You
that
put it,
long-term potential.
right? And it gets us out of what, for me, at times veer toward a worrisome proactive or predicated, what's the word I'm looking for here? Predetermined set of expectations
That we can't actually.
that we can't
Control.
achieve and that aren't in the ordinance.
Mhm.
But I think the outcome would hopefully still be the same, right, in terms of,
Because once it's protected, it's protected.
Right.
And,
Right.
and I think that to me isn't maybe showing, when you talk about the statistics, the 20% of the agricultural land, like, but, and I'm not trying to think slogan-y or anything like that, but it's like, because we hear the opposite, I think, about, from what I hear, sort of more within the city, like, well, once it's gone, it's gone.
Mhm.
But but I hear once it's gone about such small pieces of land. And this is like, once it's protected, and this is protecting,
Yeah.
whether we're talking
any-
about,
Sure.
about small acre farms, large acre farms, whatever, like, it's, you know, when we talk about 1,000-acre, you know, that to me is maybe these large, you know, when we talk about these 1,000-acre blocks, like that's that's a long-term block, right? And to me, that's,
Yeah.
you know, so much more persuasive of an argument compared to like 20 trees. So, so there, you know, it's,
Well, this is maybe useful, sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, no, I
Because
just.
that's a really
yeah.
great point, and it, for me, what I feel is, it was so natural that we would generate this many ideas out of these really fruitful, and then maybe part of the process here is not, I don't want to call it scaling back, but for lack of a better term, I'm going to use that, right, of now.
Right sizing.
A what?
Right sizing.
Right sizing, oh, that's cool. That's probably used
Speaking
in
of
cool
slogans.
context. Yeah. So right sizing this, because I had not, until thanks to you all, thought about this in that context. So to whatever degree, I didn't know even what the logic model was, but to whatever degree we can, God, I got one more meeting, y'all. Just when things got
I
interesting.
think it could be
John's last
pretty
meeting is next
simple.
next
Yeah.
Yes.
I think a simple solution would be maybe like putting an E under 2 that said something like preserving long-term viability of agricultural land potential.
Yeah.
Just to spell it out,
Yeah.
so.
Preserving long-term viability of,
Agricultural land potential.
Yeah, that's a great.
Where you were mentioning is agriculture around the city even as a sort of defining, and that's what the Greenbelt is.
So,
Mhm.
things that are, I wonder if we can go to the question of what's in there that you're very happy to see and don't want to see thrifted. Things that came up to the top of likes. We want to protect this both in the intent and the language that you see.
don't all speak at once.
No, it's such a great question. But just this whole conversation has made that harder to answer, because I'm now reading this all through the lens that you all have provided. Because it feels now that, I would want to distill my response back to like 4 broad areas of either land preservation or water quality or,
I just want to say, I'm trying my best to follow the thread, but, so this might not be useful, so speak up if it's not. But again, going back to the difference between goals and implementation being that you have the agency right now to set any goals, whether or not they may or may not fit within the extent of the millage as it reads in black and white right now. And then within those goals, rank them as they are feasible within the millage. But then there's also the tools to implement. And so if there's any concern about whether or not something's actually feasible, that will play out in the development of the tool, like the scoring system, where if you're worried about how actually can we support local food and new farmers, you can have it as a goal. It can be somewhere on your list of highest priorities, but in practice, it'll translate to our scoring system, and it will translate to, if you all recommend, the development of a parcel level priority map that helps guide targeted outreach to certain parcels that have potential to achieve some of these goals. So I don't want you to shy away from including things that you feel are beyond the scope of the millage, because ultimately it will be scoped by the millage.
Sure.
It can only be shaved off. So right sizing makes sense, but it sounds like you're prioritizing things, whereas this might have just been a list, a comprehensive list, but it
Sure.
wasn't in any order, and you're putting them in the logical order right now?
I think prioritizing is different. The logical order, or I think you just don't want to create a strategic plan. That's a public document that has goals that you're not achieving, and/or that you're kind of scoring, it's kind of part of your scoring criteria, but it really shouldn't be, because, I don't know, I guess I would be careful about putting goals in there that are outside of the scope of what we can do, even if you don't start that right now.
All I meant to say, sorry, last thing was that's the purpose within this framework of the dilemma section.
Yeah.
And whether or not something should be moved into the dilemma section is where we can acknowledge
makes
that these are
sense.
things, this is feedback we collected, which
Yeah.
I think is really important to acknowledge.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to have folks go, why don't you
Right.
have X, Y, or Z in there?
Exactly.
We said this.
Yeah.
But as long as it's framed within the context of dilemma,
Yeah.
this is where we're hamstrung. I think it's both useful to include and you protect yourselves, because in the previous strategic plan, we have local food and new farmers, but we never integrated any
Into the
criteria
criteria.
into evaluating those other than
Right.
closed session deliberations, which is great, but the public had nothing to
Right.
use as an indicator for how we're measuring the value of those things. So it could have been integrated, and it's within our framework, but there are other things that will move to the dilemma section.
Makes sense.
Can we, I think as we finalize some of these things, and part of it is that we have some missing information still, right? So we've heard about these dilemmas, but we don't necessarily have numbers attached to them. Like, how much money would it take to achieve X? Because is it sort of a barrier? Is it an impossible barrier? Is it somewhere in between? So I'm having trouble thinking about, we know that administration, for example, needs to be 6% over the life of the millage. Like, how much have we spent to date? How much do we have left? What would it take to have an educational campaign? Is that something that we could create some more space over a couple of years and contract to do that? Or is it are there some one-time expenditures? Are these long-term expenditures? So it's
And I
it's
think
hard to
Remy
know.
probably can give an idea, kind of high level, certainly not
Yeah.
numbers, but a sense of where that is. Fair enough?
Yeah, two
Yeah.
things I would say is that I do believe we're meeting the cap now. We don't have tons of wiggle room. I don't have 3% left over to go and double myself. So I do think that we're up against that upper limit. And then two, in terms of the strategic plan, I think that the outcome could simply be you all view it as an initiative or as a value to have these conversations with city staff and administrators and council members and engage to just move this discussion along and find those numbers and make projections and things like that, but without a push to do so. I'd say written in, then there's nothing to stand on in terms of we're working toward this goal. So that's just, if you want to include it, it can simply be in prompt discussion with X, Y, or Z person, or find out these things.
Right. I'm just trying to understand what it actually looks like in practice. If we want these to be priorities, but we know that there's this barrier, what would we need to get it done?
One of the challenges to doing that, I think, is that this is still high level. So when we talk about education and outreach, we've identified a gap. You could fill that gap all kinds of ways. In an ideal world, you could have a marketing team and, you could choose to include that as a priority and see how you can address it. Like, what would it look like if we had to do that within our current budget? It would probably be a video of Remy doing his presentation that you send out on Nextdoor, and that would be great. It would be so much farther than what you've done, and Remy's really good at that presentation.
Be famous.
And you would really have achieved quite a bit over what I think has happened with awareness in recent years. And then there's what about if we really wanted to do active, recruiting of particular parcels of land? Okay, well, that takes this many hours. And so you may be able to make a decision about what you'd like to prioritize working on, and then flesh out how well can we do this within the resources we have and/or the resources that we might be able to gain. I think I've been looking at you a lot more than you, and I apologize. That's okay.
No, I guess I'm just hesitant to put something in the vision if we don't have the resources. Like, I get what you're saying high
Sure.
level, but,
Well, then we add the strategy of
yeah, or in
leverage
in
resources
any
and
of
leverage
it,
assets
right,
to
right.
da-da-da-da.
But then it would, yeah, I want things to be achievable,
Mhm.
because I think there's this point, that Sheila
Right.
made that I think is really important, that we don't want to put things in writing and set community expectations, where then we have people who have those expectations and those expectations aren't being met, and then we're being held to something that we can't
Yeah.
achieve.
And really, the vision should be aspirational and inspirational, but not something that you're saying, we will deliver all these things. It's
Yeah.
we envision a future where,
Yeah.
and we will work towards those, and it may be even saying in some way in the document, and here are the steps we're taking towards this future. I think that's kind of the power of a vision, is allowing yourself, because most of us, when we plan a vision, like say for our own careers, we start telling ourselves all the reasons it won't work. I'm very big on, oh no, I could never do that, But when you get it down on paper and you say, this is what our hearts really want, and then you've got the initiative to work towards it. And it absolutely should be aspirational and you shouldn't hold yourself to accomplish everything within your vision. But I think it's okay to have a certain level of loftiness to it, because it inspires people also to join your effort and to believe in what you're doing and to do the work that will get you there. That being said, we should be careful not to, I mean, you won't single-handedly protect our water resources, right, as a Greenbelt. You won't single-handedly, defend us against natural disasters. So I guess just to say, consider the difference between sort of your vision and how your work can contribute to that vision, and maybe even just saying it straight up. We know we can't make all this happen alone.
I think that's what a storyboard or logic model can show, is like,
So
this is
how we
towards
see
that goal.
towards-
It's
yeah,
not like
yeah.
achieving
Right.
that goal all by itself.
Right.
But this is why we're doing this, this is why we're spending
Contribute to
time on
this
this.
future
This is
that we
why
believe
we
in.
have the criteria of this for parcel acquisition, because it's towards this particular goal.
And I think we need to
A lot
add
of it's
another
about
core,
communication.
oh, sorry. I think we need to add another core dilemma, which obviously is funding constraints for educational outreach, or just more generally. And I think that might get to more the
Yes.
meat of what we've been talking about,
Thank you.
at least so we can name that
Yeah,
up front.
that's a good suggestion.
Yeah, it's in that alignment of resources, but not in the dilemmas, and it should be. Thank you.
Our group also identified the language around regional planning as needing clarification, just so that,
The terminology.
yeah.
Mhm. Did anyone have a thought on what is a more accurate term?
I would just
Oh.
throw out regional conservation planning,
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay,
conservation,
thank
Right.
you.
unifying.
Is it even planning or just coordination,
Oh,
really?
coordination.
Because planning implies the whole thing about
Yeah,
township planning, but this is more just, I know what you're doing and I know what you're doing.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Maybe just
great.
planning and coordination, because I think,
Sometimes
Is
if
it
you're going
not-
after parcel prioritization quality, you want
You wanna get at that
places, you
level.
want to pull in, there's a real planning piece.
Mhm.
Yeah.
that's very
Yeah.
true.
Listening to, I'm sorry, I forgot her name again, MSU.
Jay.
Jay. Jay.
Jay.
The private part, I've added words cross-sector, and I added things that said including select or critical private partners, because we had all NGOs in government, and she started talking banking and finance, and that this is really a planning that is far beyond just a government piece, and that it's private, it's development rights, there's banks maybe involved, and so I added a few of those as possible things that could go.
I just
in.
realized I have your copy, because I see that language right here.
Thank you. So we're going to say regional coordination and planning?
Regional conservation.
Regional conservation
Planning and
coordination
planning
and
and
planning.
The
Say that 5 times
RCCP.
fast.
Another RCCP.
How many acronyms can you say in one sentence?
Damn it.
Challenge.
Nobody's gonna understand a damn word we say.
The whole sentence
No,
of
that's
acronyms.
really.
So one of the things that we talked about in our group was in the critical success factors, using the county metrics for the scoring. And I don't know that that people had enough time to review Remy's memo that he sent out about that. So to take that in and to really think about that, and is that something that, Sheila, I know you're leading this effort and scoring, and if you were aware that we're headed down that path, or that's Remy's recommendation, it appears from the memo that he sent. So I just
Remind me,
wanted to
this is
point
the
this.
memo you sent a while back about what we had gone through in our.
No, he just sent it. Yeah,
I
see,
might
that's
have
what, I
missed it.
didn't think that we had time as a group to really read that.
The memo that's on the cover sheet to the packet that you all got just kind of lays out the timeline.
Oh, yes.
And next meeting is when Washington County Parks would come and present to you all on their methodology.
Okay.
And then we'd explain where I took that next for you to consider in terms of adopting your.
Sure.
So you're gonna all have a fresh take from their staff on.
That's gonna be great.
Which I think is
Thanks.
spelled out in 2A under
Yep.
critical success
Yeah,
factors.
thanks for coordinating that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that use of existing metrics is something that helps you not recreate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We don't have to spend a bunch
Right.
more money doing
But
this.
also, we don't want to be, if there's something that perhaps isn't part of that, Remy had noted in his memo about that we can step away and do our own thing as needed.
Sure.
I took that as the core dilemma, quality data on impact, the sophisticated analyses needed. Is that what you're thinking out of the master's project, the upcoming master's
Yeah.
project, that they would develop feasible versions of some of these impact measures?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what that refers to versus parcel level prioritization or anything like that.
Gotcha.
It's mostly indicators to share in city reporting, citywide reporting, let alone our own program, but measures for success in the program citywide.
So I was actually not taking a message on my phone, but I was looking up, I was trying to find an image. There was a couple images in a previous project I did of a logic model work, and I want to put a boundary or constraint on it because those take a significant, a different type of effort than we've engaged in. We can restructure this to some, but I want to make sure we're thinking in a similar way about what you're looking for. So the logic model stuff that I work with, you start, the vision transforms into outcomes. I mean, you just state it in a little more it has a lot of outcome language in it already. But you literally, we could sketch the strategic priorities. So one of the outcomes, source water protection, and there's something would lead to what is an action, what drives source water protection, parcel prioritization.
And I wouldn't even get that, like, some of those logic models are just miserably complicated.
But I do have that kind of feeling when I hear those words.
So what I've done is more of a situation mapping where you literally have long-term goal, short-term goal.
Medium
What's
term.
stopping us from getting there? What are we doing?
Well, partly I was thinking table format, like here's this, here's all the actions that drive it. And then you go down into a level, partial prioritization. What does that mean? Well, you've got a scoring tool revised. You're enhancing the use of current you're using current metrics, but you're also enhancing them.
Yeah.
The challenge that I have in my head as I was thinking about them is how many of these level and these level of items support multiple outcomes.
So
And
I
so
thought
I'm,
it's like a box.
yeah,
of
I'm kind of
diagrams,
thinking,
just-
so you're comfortable as you're talking about that. That's the type of thing that just shows the direct connections a little more.
I can share some examples from other organizations
Yeah.
that just give
Well,
people a visual of it, and
As
I
long
don't know
as
if it's
it's
helpful. It's just, it could be a communication tool. And I don't think it should get super
Yeah,
complicated.
the ones that are
Fairly high
intense
level.
generally have to be, it's very much an insider
Yeah.
kind of structure, but there can be simple ones. So that's one thing I wanted to make sure we were in sync on, a fairly simple, somewhat graphic organizing of the information. But the other thing that I was thinking of is the question about including things that don't exist in current funding models, which a few of you have talked about. And if I think of the strategic plan as a communication effort, particularly to council and then particularly to the general public, I think it's very important that the council as a whole understand how much this was said by a number of people from a number of townships and city, inside and out, about the value and need for that level of coordination and work. And regardless of where it comes from, you know, the current Greenbelt structure allows for active participation, you know, or participation. That alone will not deliver that for you. So that we include something in there so that that becomes part of council conversation, and the people know that we've put a boundary around. We aren't over-promising, but we are articulating this was a strong push, and really, for the success of many of these outcomes, it's really critical to have both the education piece and the coordination and planning to get the outcomes that you're talking about. So I would like to have it in there in some way, and you'll have to check and see if we've included enough language that doesn't overcommit you in a way that's not realistic.
You've nicely tied together these, I guess our core dilemmas had expanded to 3, right? Around the regional coordination, quality data, and the funding constraints. And you're tying 1 and 3 together, right, in this way. And so, yeah, it would be great to see that articulated.
Other likes or concerns or suggestions for us?
In particular, the strategic priorities, I feel like we spent more time talking about vision and then dilemmas. So just coming back to the draft strategic priorities, is that because those, to what degree did you like or were you concerned about strategic priorities 1 through 4 and the items that come under them?
I think it makes sense.
I like them all.
Yeah, I agree with them.
Are they in order that reflects?
I think that the order can, you know, they're in order right now of the sort of higher order concern around regional planning, which then kind of feeds into a lot of other, but number 4, then aligning Greenbelt acquisitions with water, climate, and health equity. Well, you know, some of that is your acquisitions go all the way down to your scoring, but if you're going to align with these other issues, then it comes right back up to the high level coordination. So I personally feel very open to reordering those if there's a more sensible approach. I often think 1 and 4 are related in some ways, but I also can see that 3 and 4 are related. So
No, I was just curious whether you organize them according to.
Did you read those as,
Only quickly.
as levels of importance or any timing associated
No.
with any of them?
No.
No, I didn't.
We put numbers on them actually here because it made it easier for conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And not sure you want that in the document.
Right.
You might frame
Right.
it differently.
We have health equity there in that number 4, but is that a goal? Was that something that was raised in terms of equity, actually?
It was by the townships, and it came up in terms of townships that don't have millages and whose priorities, who may not have the luxury of prioritizing land preservation.
Yeah.
However, there's interest in those communities, but it's challenging for them to allocate resources in the way that
So
other
equity
communities
of
can.
Access to whatever local food production or.
Local
benefits there
food,
are.
access to the lands, to any of the benefits that would come along with this program, and also, to be blunt, some people felt that this Ann Arbor-centric effort
Yeah.
excluded them from the conversation, and they didn't feel like they had been as, now, I think our conversations, we were so happy to see folks come, and the conversations they had with folks around the table were lovely. So I think the door is open to that, but they raised it as a concern that in the past and up until now,
Right,
it's kind of felt, oh, the Ann Arbor Greenbelt, right? It's like a very Ann Arbor.
right. There was
But-
even that comment about, should it be renamed?
Yes, there was a little conversation around, should, someday, could it be renamed or reframed in some way that makes us feel like we have a place at the table as collaborators?
Right.
And even if we don't have as much money as our neighboring townships,
Right.
are there
it-
creative solutions? So
Yeah.
that's
right.
where some of the equity pieces came in.
Do you think, when I look at, city and township health equity goals, I think the county is really one of the entities that's pushing more of this, if we think about like one community and having having an equity officer at the county level. So maybe including the county in that.
Yeah.
So it's not just
That's a
city and
good call.
township, because they've been such a key
Oh,
partner.
yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
that makes-
absolutely.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
Could I, Remy, check with you and Nika and others that were at, I'm thinking of equity on multiple levels in this. So one is health equity, and if you look at the maps, what townships don't have millages for open space preservation? What's their economic status? And what's their diversity and racial makeup? And so let's say that then the council currently is pushing more and more for cost sharing. So the future, without some emphasis on equitable land preservation, will have less clean air, less protected lands in communities that are poor, that already have health outcome issues. So there's that piece of equity. So how do you get cost share in areas where the townships do not have resources to invest?
It's a very
So
good
that
point.
needs a creative approach to how you manage that one. The other one I'd never thought of till you said it the other day, Remy, which was farmers who might not know about this program. You're like, who knows about it and how do you know about it? Well, you may have your head somewhat above water and be reading something or be connected, but if the average age, there's a lot of people who are farming and aren't connected. So the outreach piece and the education piece is also to make it sure that people that could benefit who own farms are connected by the Greenbelt reaching to them. So that was the second equity
Yeah.
piece. And the other just open space and clean air. I think there was a third one, and it's out of my head right now. But it was townships in general, and then it was clean air access, and then it was individual farmers.
There was some conversation about access for recreation,
Yeah.
and we found that priority overall not to be, it kind of dropped. It came up a little in the early conversations, but then some folks even
Did you say
said,
the recreation piece?
yeah,
Yeah, I
that
was wondering why that wasn't in our
Yeah.
vision.
it was actually, in some cases, actively demoted, voted down, if you will.
I demoted it in one of my meetings.
I did too.
But I wouldn't have demoted what you just said. And so your brilliant distillation, I didn't take notes fast enough to capture it, but I wish it were recorded.
It is recorded.
Are you sure? Will the mic pick that up from that?
I hope so.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, wonderful, because that's
wrote down
the
most of what she said.
framing that cuts the Gordian knot, at least for me, with the public debate about townships participating or not participating. Because it's a basic human health
Yeah.
rights
Right.
issue, and therefore needs to be blind to.
Yeah,
all the-
just to give an
The
example,
equity.
other than Ipsy, Manchester is the most food insecure part of the county.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people don't realize that and how we could have a huge impact.
Manchester.
Yeah, Manchester in particular, yeah.
Awesome. Well,
The other thing, the county health equity, county public health and health, they have, there's some natural and wonderful partnerships that they're already doing a lot of these things, and they have certain communities, but you look at the map and you see gaps that we won't be able to fulfill if we pursue cost sharing in the same way.
Sure.
Speaking of maps, it's making me think about, that's part of what would be really helpful to be able to see, right, is the overlay of where are the gaps in our Greenbelt, where's the food insecurity? Where's the, where's the topsoil? And to be able to, is there a master's project in there somewhere?
Yeah.
But sometimes that can help you realize, oh, we do have a lever that we can pull within our constraints that will impact this thing over here or will contribute to this thing over here.
Well,
And
it
we,
might be a new
within our
funding-
scoring or within our outreach.
I mean, there might be funding resources out there when it's framed in that way, right? Or university partnerships when it's framed in that way. I mean, if we can do it for marijuana businesses and give them extra points for equity, like, we should be able, no, I mean, really,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, if we can wax that poetically about it and give points for that, like, we can do it for this, right? I mean, they're
And
just,
not just wax poetically, because that's already achievable.
Yeah.
I'm ready to do that at any point. But the thing that we need is the next step with more solid numbers beyond what Lee was able to scratch the surface of with her analyses, is diving way deeper into ecosystem services and those carbon sequestration benefits and the climate mitigation resilience benefits. And once we can actually attribute numbers, that's when we might be able to break some of the paradigm, have a paradigm shift around working in townships that are not providing matching
and we
funds.
did just bring in someone else into our sustainability office at the city, where there might be some partnerships there.
Right,
As
right.
well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's the enhanced effort piece.
Yep.
You
Yeah.
start with current ones, but you're pursuing enhanced ones.
Always.
So, and I'm sorry, but I just have to ask, like, under this rubric of funding constraints, do we in some ways want to allude either explicitly or implicitly to the ordinance language itself that states a privilege for townships that have millages or contribute?
That's in the ordinance language?
Yeah, it's in the ordinance.
It's in the resolution.
It's in the, I'm sorry, it's in the resolution.
The resolution can be amended, the millage cannot.
Yeah,
Right.
the millage can be amended, but it's very.
Right.
That
Well,
would be
right.
tremendous effort to, yeah, we
Right.
don't want to
The
go there.
resolution-
But the resolution itself, it's just, yeah, it's this
By council.
sticking point.
By council.
And they don't,
Yes.
the exception of one person here and several on council, many of them don't actually understand what that guiding language says. And so maybe the strategic plan is a chance to articulate it again.
Right.
And the unintended consequences of it.
Yeah, and the unintended consequences, right? You watch the debate over the Lepkowski property and it
Right.
really spoke to what you.
Raised awareness.
So the broader picture being when Lepkowski took place, or that conversation and deliberation, there was some staff conversation around whether or not now was the appropriate time to try and sit down with council and get an orientation on the Greenbelt done. But as things evolved, it became clear that this strategic planning process would be really the most beneficial piece to bring to that table. If we're only gonna get council in a room so many times, and be able to actually coordinate that. So if there's a chance for the Greenbelt to present, we should have it include your guys' updated strategic plan before going and sitting down with them.
Yeah.
Right.
So, all that history.
Yeah, that was when when I was reading through it on my own before this meeting, the suggestions were to meet with city council candidates about what the Greenbelt is, and then after they're elected, meet with them again about what the Greenbelt is. So then we don't potentially run into a Lepkowski.
So should we just push on? Should we go to 10 o'clock? What do you?
So, suggestions to take into another round of edits.
I don't know, I think maybe 4 should be collapsed under number 1 and if it's in its own. But that's after you were talking about it, it seems like they really are the same thing.
Want my copy because I stole your copy? No.
Or, oh, sorry,
I do.
the
It's
strategic
right here.
priorities.
I'd
You
like
liked it
four
being
on its
separate?
own, just based on the conversations that we just
Had
had,
about
just to kind of
equity.
call it out.
Okay,
And
because the
spell out the
conversations
count.
we had just pushed me the other direction.
I mean, we could put them closer to each other so that they flow,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah, whatever.
conceptually.
They kind of coordinate actions of the Greenbelt with other
Right.
efforts in the region, including
Yes.
land preservation,
Yeah.
food security, climate action, like you just listed out that way. Maybe that's how they.
So there's sort of a coordination, there's an education and awareness. That would leave us currently with this parcel level prioritization as a third bucket. Is that part of something,
That's the biggest part of our strategy. That's actually the meat and bones of it, right?
it's what you feel like you can actually dive into right away?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right.
Which ones are those that you feel most?
I guess that's the preservation.
Number 3.
That's the preservation, right? It's coordination, education, preservation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And your major preservation strategy is to make a shift toward
Mhm.
parcel level prioritization?
Mhm.
Yeah, if there was one thing that would change.
What'd you say, John?
Nothing, I'm sorry, I was talking out loud. Yes,
He agrees.
I agree.
I kind of like, I like when you can boil it down to a few, you know, like there's,
Right.
at a high level, it's about coordination, education, and preservation, and then here are the things that we're doing underneath those.
It used to be preservation strategies and programmatic strategies. So that's matching funds, and education and outreach was under programmatic strategies, and preservation strategies were the 1,000-acre blocks, farmland complexes, so forth. So it sounds like you've added a third rather than just having two, which is fine. Just noting that that would be a deviation from the previous strategic plan, which is up to you guys if you want to break it down in those 3 categories versus 2.
Sure.
Because the coordination would be above a program strategy.
I view it as under programmatic strategies, because
Sure.
also to have a whole, is coordination the regional conservation planning?
And coordination with water, climate, and health equity goals. So aligning better with city, county, and township goals, as well as coordinating the regional conservation planning.
Can I offer some my own mental gymnastics on this? Just to make the water really muddy. It feels like the organizing rubric here is a healthier community, right? This is what we're talking about, a healthier community, more sustainable, more equitable.
Yeah.
And I see within that these health equity goals, water, climate, the things that are in 4. That's the overarching, and then within that are these 3, coordination, education, and preservation. I don't mean that needs to absorb 4 or whatever, but just in terms of structuring it.
Can you just repeat that again? I blanked out for a moment.
So the overarching strategic priority is a healthier community that's more sustainable
Yep.
and more equitable.
Mm-hmm.
And that means all of the things that are embedded in number 4.
Mm-hmm.
And we get to those things through items 1, 2, and 3.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that might work.
Mm-hmm.
Will you? No?
Because you
Okay.
said they're not actually going to be numbered, right? So it's like
won't
we
be
get
numbered.
to these.
Oh, yeah, this
things
is just for
by,
conversation.
and that's-
So you're saying that actually,
But-
number 4 is actually a vision of the future versus a strategic priority?
No, I mean, no.
I was just doing it on my own, just to,
So
It's not a
here's,
vision because we can't
here's the
do
question then, following that logic of going sort of through number 4, and then there's 1, 2, 3 underneath it. Does that 1, 2, 3 actually achieve number 4? It feels like it wouldn't, because regional conservation coordination and planning wouldn't necessarily get you to those higher level goals, because that's conservation planning, would that necessarily include water, climate, health equity? Maybe it would, so that's
Yeah, I
not the
think it
question.
would, or it
Okay.
should.
So we
or-
can make, we can make it. We
Yeah.
can make it so. Does that feel like a logical? We can try it, how about that?
Yeah, try
We
it
can
out.
try it, and then you can react to the new version, because at this point, it's hard for our brains to like keep, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
okay,
I think that might work and match up with
All right.
Sheila's suggestions on logic
Yep.
model. I can see
Yeah.
that.
yeah, because then you're starting to draw the picture. She's got one
Yeah,
right there.
she's got one already. She's just quietly like,
Fantastic.
this whole damn thing.
I
Just
I
photocopy it and send it to
And
her.
I don't think this is gonna, it's not the idea that it's comprehensive, the idea is it becomes this
It's conceptual.
communication tool, because if somebody reads this,
It's
and we
conceptual.
get nitpicky on words, then, and it keeps us guided, but I
Yeah.
think the wording is something that, of course, we'll have to.
It's meant for someone who's outside this process to be able to see it and understand.
So it could be something that is jointly created,
Uh-huh.
but we've jointly created this,
Mhm.
so it's just the content of that in a different form.
Thank you.
So
Cool.
To go
Okay.
together with.
Yeah, but I mean, it's
not
speaking to,
replace it.
right, it's speaking to an audience that's not necessarily familiar with the work.
Correct.
Is that what you're- yeah.
It's
So it
not
should bring
overly
it to-
complicated,
Uh-huh,
yeah, but it should also speak to us to say, okay.
Oh, yeah, that's why we wanted to do
This is
that.
how much we have left,
Yep, great,
what should we do?
great.
You know, where do we prioritize our, because you lay out all the strategies,
Right.
and we say, okay, of those,
Right.
this is where we have the biggest bang
Yeah.
for the buck possibly, this is what we're already doing anyway, this is.
Our next page could be like challenges to this, right? And then the final page is whatever, opportunities.
Mhm. I think it does make a lot of sense to come to the table with ideas for solutions as we started this conversation, right? There are many resources within this community that you could tap into.
The assets should be listed.
So,
yeah.
um,
That'll make us feel better. Right?
And-
the assets include, how many acres do we have already of that, like, how much farmland is left in acres,
Mm-hmm.
acres? That's all like what stimulates what we do, I think, and yeah, part of the story.
So I think that we have, I don't know that I can recap per se the changes that will be made in a
There's
concise.
couple I can see.
Okay,
So I think this, in the education, the renewal of the millage language is reframed in education and really building more knowledge and some under awareness of the impact of investing. So
Mhm.
that becomes part of there. The logic model we talked about, Stephanie's, the really highlighting
The
the
long term.
Greenbelt protecting land for the long term. So there's in perpetuity
Mhm.
language, there's,
Mhm.
and which is up here under sustainable. So those are three big,
Mhm.
both content and structural suggestions. Let me think if there was something else. A concern, we're still, I think, maybe struggling a little with how we frame what is out of the scope of what this isn't in there, but what Greenbelt can't do.
mhm,
So I think we probably will retain a statement related to dilemmas.
mhm,
And I think we can add something in terms of a statement of multiple assets and partnerships. And not that those will solve all of this, but something that calls that out. So those are the chunks that you've given us so far.
In terms of next steps, Remy, you made a recommendation in the memo on the front page about how, so Bridgeport's contracted work will continue with revision of this framework into another draft, and then there'll be a handoff to Greenbelt staff. I anticipate that we can maintain
The whole team.
the whole team. Don't you love how we say staff like that? I anticipate that we will try to preserve a small amount of time so that we can continue to have some check-ins with Remy that might be useful as you move along through the process. Did you want to share anything else about the timeline from that handoff sort of framework to staff?
This is over.
No, just that it is very much a draft. It is very much a draft timeline. We have about 7 closings by the end of the calendar year that we're working on, so
Wow.
no guarantee that they all happen. But at least 4 should happen, if not 5. So Anyway, that's just to supplement the black and white on the page, which is aspirational, but also somewhat realistic. I think it draws the timeline out long enough to where we really have a chance to thoroughly look over every piece of this. I felt it was a little early to give you that parcel level prioritization memo that I did include, but I just wanted to prep you for November's meeting. So you don't need to be looking at that for this meeting, but hopefully by November you've had a chance to read through it and prepare questions for Washtenaw County Park staff and myself. Do you have any questions about this timeline?
And if you're.
Looks ambitious.
Yeah, if you need a copy of it, it's over by Anissa. And I think did you email that too?
The timeline, I just did, yeah,
Yeah.
before the meeting.
Who's coming to do that, Remy?
Rosie, who came she was at the first meeting, first public meeting. She came in November 2017 to give the same presentation that she'll give to you in November 2019.
Good, great.
Do we still have closed session?
Nope.
Because I saw it here on this agenda.
Yep.
I started to
Sorry.
freak
I thought
out.
we would, and then things changed, so.
Okay,
My mic on.
so are we,
One last thing before we adjourn. Can you bring up a separate item about advertising the open positions? I've been emailing Realtor friends about
oh yeah,
Alex's
the
position.
open positions on the
Yeah.
commission.
just encouragement that
Yes,
people reach out to
we
their
do want to
networks.
encourage people to apply.
It's a
both for-
realtor?
We need a Realtor and we need an at-large.
Because John's last meeting is next.
My last
month.
meeting is next November 7th, but that's because I'm going out of town. But I'm not I've got up for a 3-year term, so we'll be traveling. But if it makes sense to have me like stay on and participate in some of the, like, I don't know how this works officially, but I like haven't resigned or anything, so I could continue to help. Oh, is it? Okay, good to know. Well, I was going to offer my help, but it wouldn't be much help anyway.
Could he call in, or does that count?
No, that's,
No.
yeah, electronic.
So.
So, all right, sorry.
Yeah,
I'll participate as a citizen in
Yeah.
summer 2020.
yeah. So we need
How long
to
are
spread
you
the
gonna be
word.
out of town for?
7 months,
Where you go?
Mexico.
So jealous.
It's the part where we all get jealous.
Right, yeah.
You too can go into massive debt. Finance a harebrained trip.
And spend 6 months with your children, day in and day out.
For my kids.
Can I just say
Yeah.
that this is the last time I guess Fran and I might see you in this project. So thank you for bringing us on board. We wish you the best of success for the next 15 years. We'll be watching now. Hopefully it won't be that long. But it's really been a pleasure to work on this project. And to be honest, so many projects with public engagement work, there's a lot more contention or opposition. And I mean, I know there are some things in the MLive comments, but a lot of folks see the value of this work and really the idea of just getting it out there more in front of them. When they see it and when they hear about it, they go, oh, wow, that's impressive. So thank you for letting us have a small part in that process.
Well, thank you. Thanks for all of your work, Anika and Fran. It's just been invaluable. And thank you, Emmy, who's not here, but for applying for the grant to fund that work. So we truly appreciate your direction and insight and all of the work that you put in. And Remy, you too. I mean, it's just been, besides all of the deals that are trying to get done, all of the extra time that you've been putting in. So, thank you.
And the bus tour is on Saturday the 12th?
Yep. So I wanted to mention, bus tour is October 12th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. It is full. So for those on the commission who are planning on going, if you could take your own vehicles. I was planning on going, but now I'm going to be out of town, so on a much-needed vacation. So I think Robert was planning on following behind.
I have market, otherwise I'd be.
Yeah, and we're getting coverage from M Live, Ryan Stanton is going to be on the bus tour as well, so that's great news. So education and outreach. All right. We don't have a closed session, next agenda items. I think we have that kind of laid out in this timeline. Any other next agenda items? Okay, there's no other members of the public. Report from commission committees. Communications didn't meet. Executive committee did not meet. So, on that note, does someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there support?
Support.
Thanks, Roseanne. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.